Hello again, everybody. I'm Michael Conniff, and this is The Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me. A podcast devoted to entrepreneurs, startups, founders, and their pursuit of funding through angels, VCs, investors of all kinds, family offices. And it is with great pleasure this week that I welcome Travis Bruffy to the podcast. Welcome, Travis. Great to have you.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine, Michael. Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm going to brag on you a little bit. So don't blush, don't get embarrassed. So Travis, and also we're going to talk some football because I can't even get to the other stuff without asking you a couple things. So Travis was an all-conference tackle, played some tight end at Texas Tech, played for Cliff Kingsbury, now the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals in the U.S., and played with Patrick Mahomes, who just exited the playoffs in the U.S. as well on the way to the Super Bowl, and was captain of the team for 2 years there, which I think is amazing. And also something I put a lot of stock in is when somebody's all academic, all conference. I think that's pretty cool. I once hired a person who was all Pac-12, and her name was Vanessa Pierce. She turned out to be one of the best hires I ever made. So let's put it this way. You come well recommended, but tell us how you ended up in London with Ligo Partners as a venture analyst in gaming, sports, and cannabis.
Yes. It's a heck of an introduction. It's a heck of an introduction. I appreciate that. And, first and foremost, I was just surrounded by great people that just put you in the right place. And that's all it is. Like Coach Kingsbury, one of those people who just made sure as soon as you rolled into campus that academics was a priority. He was actually an academic All-American himself. And I'm not sure a lot of people know this. Patrick Mahomes is also an academic All-American. That was instilled upon us. So I didn't do anything else but follow the people that were before me in all aspects. But in terms of getting my way across the pond, and that was a bit of a different journey. After college, I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to play football with the Green Bay Packers. I didn't last very long, as a lot of people do, and the majority of people do get that chance. But immediately upon essentially getting released, I went to a coffee shop after I dried my tears and started sending out job applications. And the first person to get back to me was Ligo Partners. Ligo Partners is a multifamily office based in Miami. I didn't know what a multifamily office was. I didn't know anything about that, but I knew I wanted to work in the private markets based off some previous experiences. And just started driving down, did the rest of my job application in Lexington, Kentucky, at a Starbucks there, and just kept driving down, hoping I got the interview. Very fortunate I got the interview and lived there for about 6 months. And then when we tried to do some UK operations, wanted to open up a London office. I guess I was shortlisted for that, and been here ever since, about a year and a half.
So you're in the UK now, a Chelsea soccer fan, which is, too bad because I'm a Manchester United fan, but we're going to let that pass. But did your heart break a little bit when you saw the Packers lose and then the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes lose?
My heart broke a ton when, I guess on both, but it's really regarding Pat. Pat is absolutely unbelievable, tremendous guy as well. Can't pretend that we're best of friends by any means. He was only there my first year actually, but always rooting for him, always have rooted for him. But I think everyone's rooting for the Bengals now that the Chiefs are out. So I'm glad that some stories, at least some Cinderella stories, are still being facilitated. My Packers, though, that broke my heart, especially, I'm sure a lot of people know the history between the 49ers and the Packers, but just 2 years ago, knocked them out of another championship game. There's a lot of bad blood between the two teams, so you hate to see it. I remember when I was there, everyone was just circling the 49ers on the schedule. So I know how much it hurt those guys to drop that one. But if I know anything about those guys, I just know, the culture that's instilled in that locker room, they're going to bounce back.
We're going to get to what you're doing now, but do you miss it at all?
What I don't miss is hitting people much bigger than me for a fraction.
You look like you've lost a lot of weight. You used to be a lot bigger, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I've lost about 100 pounds since I stopped playing.
I didn't realize that much.
Well, I can't say I've done much more than just live like a normal person. I was on a pretty interesting diet when I was playing, so I wasn't naturally big, like a lot of people were. So I was trying to kind of make up for some, I wouldn't say genetic shortcomings, but trying to essentially outkick what God gave me. I'm just back to equilibrium now, but it is a bit interesting to kind of see. I saw some pictures. The new iOS updates, they bring up those past pictures. It says this year, a couple of days ago, or remember this trip. And I'm like, Jesus, how did I need to tell you to buy 2 plane tickets a couple of years ago.
Right. You're less of a bodyguard now, but look at where you are. So let's talk about what you're doing now. First of all, tell us what Ligo Partners is. As I understand it, it's kind of a consortium of about brings together a consortium of 2,000 family offices. I was on a call, thanks to you, that had 500 family offices on a pitch call. Tell us about the core company itself.
Yeah, the company itself. So I guess it starts back to what our name is. So our name LIGO is actually the Latin word for bridge. Family office investing, at least as it pertains to alternative assets, has largely been dominated by, I guess, two main factors: that be fixed income type opportunities in the public markets, as well as your more long term multifamily residential plays, or even residential real estate holdings that kind of make up the majority of the portfolio. What you didn't hear me mention was, I think, the most lucrative asset class in the private markets, without any sort of financial engineering behind it, is direct access into venture type or off market tech deals. Because of the managing partner, as well as the principal member of the family office, Alec Andronikov. His background was more on the operational side. Several successful exits in the media tech, consumer facing technologies type space. He realized that premium that a family office can have on the cap table as an operator. So when he exited, he realized, okay, why don't I just kind of bridge the two gaps, see the opportunity here, and use some of this pretty interesting deal flow that's really only been inherent to a couple square miles on Sand Hill Road for generations. Why don't I just democratize it a bit more and let this cash rich and also value add asset class of the family offices get more involved in this type of deal discussion? That's what LIGO started as. It was about it was probably kicked off in February of 2020 is when we kind of unofficially launched, but really when we started getting the flow of things was around August of 2020. And what we do is essentially curate some of the best deals that we saw that are off market type opportunities, backed by elite blue chip level VCs, and bring them to our family office network and say, hey, it's a direct allocation. If you're interested, we'll introduce you directly to the CEO. We don't charge fees for the investor. We essentially just say, hey, this is the opportunity. You don't have to go through an SPV or a fund to do so.
Now, I reached out to your boss to try to get him on the podcast, and he said, I'm too private. I can't talk. So we appreciate your coming on. And then I reached out to your company after the pitches that I saw, and I sent an email to my contact, and I said, it occurred to me I should ask, is this confidential information, or is this information I can write about? And he said, it's confidential. So you keep things pretty close to the vest, which means we're not actually going to be able to talk about the pitches that I saw at Ligo. But as I understand it, you saw the pitches in the sports and entertainment space at Unicorn Pitches. Is that right? Did you see those?
Are you referring? First, I should kind of clarify on a point that you just mentioned. So yes, we are very private. It's inherent with the family office space is the discretion that goes alongside it. We're okay to explain kind of our model and how we started, but into kind of the inner workings of everything. Obviously, got to keep that kind of on the confidential basis. But can you clarify what your question was one more time?
Did you see the pitches in the Unicorn event online maybe 2 weeks ago? Were you? I thought maybe
no.
Watch. Oh, you weren't.
Okay. Not.
So let's talk. We'll talk about some of those companies in just a second. But let me ask you: sports gaming, sports including esports, gaming, and cannabis. So it sort of sounds like you have all the fun. Is that true, or is that an illusion?
It's a lot of fun. I'd say the founders that are in those spaces are definitely probably having a lot more fun than we are. But I think it's a bit of it's an interesting type space, because sports doesn't necessarily just mean on the field. It's more of an access to either consumer or health data, and it's a creative way to get to the same end result. Gaming in itself is just another extension of either commerce or some sort of marketplace type technology. But there's also tremendous. You can also think about like with the Roblox type model. It's a creator. It facilitates creator type economies. It's something that's really been very interesting, and that's obviously fun to look into and see the innovation there. And then we go into cannabis. We don't actually invest. Or we're not the right, I'd say we're not the right capital partner for like, multi-state operations or true, plant touching. We love to see the innovation on the derivatives or the, throughout the supply chain, whether it be upstream, midstream, or consumer touching type businesses. We love those types of things. But to answer your question, yeah, I'm having a blast. I mean, it's amazing. One of my also something that I did mention, and it's not necessarily a big focus of ours, but it's a big personal focus of mine, is the emerging markets is also what I cover for our firm. So I can focus a huge portion of my time is focused on sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and then Southeast Asia as well.
Wow. So that's quite a portfolio. What is the common denominator or common characteristics of companies that you find attractive for Ligo partners?
Well, I think it can be as esoteric as possible. I think you can be, if you're talking about what makes a good founder or a good company, it starts really back to what its roots are and what its intentions. I think the best companies start out solving smaller problems. And when you solve the small problem, I think you honestly stumble into billion-dollar solutions. As opposed to going out there and trying to start this trillion-dollar idea, you're missing some of the smaller steps along the way. But in terms of what LIGO is looking for, again, that's a bit more about our thesis, so I'll have to be careful how I answer that. But I think it's more so just a development of such, what we're talking about. We really love founders that are hitting kind of that international scale, that are looking to dominate not just their own market, but see opportunities outside at least either a certain demographic or a certain user base, or is going to more omni-channel type approach, whether it be through users or revenue streams, because we understand what that point means into a startup. I don't think that's inherently meaning. A lot of people will say, I'm going to classify this stage as Series A or I'm a Series B investor. We really like to hit that. I don't know if this is definitely not something that the firm stands by, but I like to look at firms that are approaching an inflection point. I think everyone is, but I classify that with a bit more qualitative type metrics as opposed to quantitative or anything you could find on Excel or on a spreadsheet. It's really more so is what are they trying to do here in the next 12 months, and does that have some sort of I guess volatility, and is that volatility, was a probability of that being favorable? I guess maybe that does go back more qualitative, but if you understand what I'm saying, is more so understand the nature of the founder, their vision, and how well they'll execute it, as opposed to just looking at opportunities across a very standardized quantitative set of metrics. I think a lot of VCs end up finding ways to financially engineer a portfolio. I don't think that's the nature of venture.
Describe what constitutes an inflection point for you.
Well, the pure definition is anything that's going to kind of I don't know if it's a deflect. I don't know if I've never heard the term deflection point, but I guess it'd be the exact opposite of anything that's representing compounded growth at any given sector, much more so than the previous metrics or the previous forecast would have anticipated, or even if the forecasts are factoring it in, wherever that point is soft circled, there's some sort of external event causing either significant upside or downside. And those events are largely either unanticipated. I think if anyone's budgeting or forecasting an inflection point, it's not a true inflection point. I think really what you're looking for is opportunity there that can be seized, whether it can be captured. For instance, if I'm branching into from a pure play software health tech, but I want to branch into the wearables spot, and I'm targeting a 1% market share in 18 months, and I end up capturing 2. We've hit an inflection point somewhere across the way because of some sort of marketing or customer acquisition strategy. And of course, you can get into the weeds to figure out where that happens. So that's exactly what we're trying to look for. And I don't pretend to be the smartest person in the room to try and figure out when that will happen. It's more so just saying, hey, what are you expecting to do? What is the confidence that you can actually convert on some of the plans, convert on some of the things that you're telling us here in diligence, and then what is also your risk tolerance as a founder? How much are you looking to generate more capital, or are you looking to kind of survive the cold winters? And I think it's also more so of a market discussion as opposed to just a founder. But again, there's so many subjective and input qualities. It's more so a lot of it's gambling as well.
Yeah, well, speaking of gambling, I wanted to ask you about gaming and sort of defining gaming. Is gaming primarily video games? Or does it, in your practice, does it encompass gambling as well? Is it one or both?
Both for sure. Both for sure. Actually, you start getting it's gambling as it pertains to gaming is very. I'd say it's people have a unnecessary amount of hesitancy around it, and largely a lot of it's because of some of the legal restrictions behind gambling. So, for instance, if there's a company with that has a state operating license already set, or for instance, a Nevada operating license, well, there's a certain number of restrictions that come to fundraising after that. So it's really difficult to sit directly on a cap table prior to a certain stage. As if it's still in the private markets or still raising a private round, it's very tough for you to not get in through some sort of convertible vehicle or some sort of indirect vehicle to get in, just because there's a legal amount of requirements for you to invest directly into it. I say that to say this is gaming oftentimes is a very guarded industry, or sorry, gambling is a very guarded industry and hard to get into because of the restrictions around it. That is not the case internationally. Internationally, it's much more open, and definitely it makes up a huge portion of the market share of the overall gaming market. But the dominant player there is esports. It's not just content. What content makes up a massive point of it, but also how they're monetizing personal assets. So as these players or these talents there, esports athletes start going through the markets of NFTs, secondary sales of such can be included in those markets, and that makes it even that much more lucrative. So to answer your question, yes, it includes both markets. I think oftentimes people differentiate the two because of a certain legislative parameters, but it could get into the global scope. That both of them are very significant when it comes to the macro share of it.
It's almost like they should be separated. I mean, you could certainly make the argument. I mean, the video gamer might and probably is very different from the gambler or the esports player.
It might be, but then at the same time, like a Counter-Strike Go player may be very different than a Fortnite player or a Call of Duty player. But at the same time, I think gambling in itself has a negative connotation. For instance, like sports booking is actually just you're enacting upon your own personal knowledge. Is there a certain chance factor? Yes, but if you've seen the movie Moneyball, you know that you can boil down some sort of sports to a model. And I think you got to be able to give the game. I don't know if you can call someone who's a professional sports book or an athlete, but you can definitely you respect their profession. It's if you differentiate the two, they are still playing the game and they're also executing on a certain skill set that they've developed. So maybe differentiating the two may be easier for fundraising and all that, but I do think they still are operating in the same market.
Well, if you ever want to know about the sports analytics business pre-Moneyball, talk to me because I had a company in the 90s.
Did you? Wow.
In fact, we talked about the NFL, but here's how long ago that was and how primitive it was. We marketed our company at the NFL Combine, which is when every team comes to see all the college players, and is now a gigantic multimedia event. Everything's televised, or a lot of it is. When we went to the Combine in the 90s, we were the only external company there. There was not a and by the way, there was no media. There was no press there. It was us and the teams, and that was it. So that just seems like dark ages, and I guess it was. But let's talk about sports data a little bit. You and I have talked before about how, and you have told me really that how valuable what you call human data is becoming. Maybe you can explain that for us. What is human data in your view? Why is this becoming more and more important?
Yeah, I just think there's a certain, especially as it pertains to wearables or things, you can even go into like things like Strava, or I guess maybe that's the best example, but anything that's tracking performance is also tracking either human optimization or human health in a standardized format. I think maybe it is catering more so towards the people, the percentage of people, and say like the 80th percentile of healthy human beings, or people that actually care enough to track the progression of their work. But that's still a very important demographic to understand. As we started seeing things, cases of I don't want this to turn into a Joe Rogan podcast by any means, but cases of things like comorbidity from vaccinations or from even from things like COVID. Well, that was actually people weren't understanding that, and it looked to actually data from some of these athletes that was almost, I wouldn't say involuntarily, but was being submitted without the intention of it going into some sort of macro study like this. So it's a very valuable information, whether it's monetized on the front end or not. But whenever an athlete is so willing, and athletes are willing to submit that data, because every athlete will tell you the most important thing to track is either progress or progressive overload. You need to measure quantitative variables. And I can measure how fast I run, but I also want to measure how long my heart rate's in a certain position, or the kinetic energy still stored in my quadriceps. Those are all things we can track now for an athlete's performance. But that also has human applications as well. It also has medical applications. And as we pretend to understand the human body, the further we try to solve these problems that are within us. And I'm not a medical expert by any means, but our eyes are opening more and more just how little we actually understand. And all sorts of human data. I guess we figure out a way to create a perpetual stream of data coming out, coming in at all given times. And I think sports tech or wearables in general are just another asset to that kind of already massive market.
Is the value and the opportunity in the hardware of the wearables or the data of the wearables, or both?
Well, that's a great question. So I'll tell you about a company that's dominated the market thus far is Whoop. Whoop is fantastic. Thank you, Whoop, very well. They have a great partnership with the NFL Players Association. I've enjoyed, free Whoop membership for quite some time, but they actually don't charge. They don't charge you for the first. They don't charge you for the wearable. The device does not cost any money. They make all their money off of subscription. So I guess in turn, you're paying a premium and paying it off over time. Yes. But the value is in the data they're collecting. The value for the user is in the data that's being presented to you. The value is not the wearable. I mean, the only thing I would say, maybe like the Apple Watch, which has some sort of fashionable, side to it. Like if you look at the Fitbit, they're not creating that for aesthetics. The same thing with like the Oura Ring. The Oura Ring is awesome. People who don't know, it tracks your sleep. It's one of the best investments. I don't have any investment into it or relationship with them, but it's one of the best investments you can make into your personal health is tracking your sleep. Oura Ring's fantastic.
I think I need to get that.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Trust me, it's awesome. They do it by far the best out there. There's a lot of sleep trackers. They're by far the best. But it's bulky. They want you to wear it all the time, but you're never going to wear it all the time. It's in the data for both the user and the company. How is that data being monetized? Of course, you're paying a subscription agreement, and that's how the company is monetizing the user. But how is the data being monetized? Well, they're not sitting on it. I can't speak on behalf of any of these companies, but logically, they're not just sitting with it to optimize internal performance. That makes no sense. They're not healthcare providers. They're not pharmaceutical companies. But the healthcare conglomerates, the massive side of things that have done both good and bad for the American healthcare system are taking that data, hopefully with the intent of doing things good and targeting better solutions or more effective outreach campaigns.
Have you looked at Peloton? They've undergone a nosedive. Too much inventory. Stock price has really faltered. During the pandemic, it was kind of the flavor of the month, it seemed. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that company?
On Peloton, well, that's interesting. I think Peloton didn't anticipate. Well, I think Peloton either did one of two things: either engineered the pandemic, which I think is very, very unlikely, and I should probably say that probably go on record to say I'm just kidding there. But they benefited from a lot of tailwinds. There are other competitors in the market, by the way, in at-home fitness. There's the Mirror, there's Ergata, all of which are great companies. But Peloton was really already kind of, I wouldn't say a household name, but a name in home fitness. And also had streamlined almost that kind of that white labeled entertainment platform as well. I don't necessarily think, if you were to take, the pandemic out of it, the gyms closing out of it on a global scale, if Peloton would have ever reached that market cap that, everyone's saying that they did. That's it. I think that they hit that because of some external variables. That's my personal opinion. Do I think it's a great product? Absolutely. Do I think it's a great company? I think it's an interesting company. I don't think I would ever buy. And the reason why is saying it's easy to look at you're in a bubble in the past, But it's also very interesting to think that you're not in a bubble when there's a pandemic and all the gyms are closed. Therefore, that's the only thing increasing, I guess increasing your top line is the fact that there is no other option. You've had an externally created monopoly. So production, therefore could have been forecasted to continue through. And again, I don't know the particulars about, how they budgeted when these conversations took place, but if you essentially have set your production milestones to cater towards, still people not wanting to go back to the gym at the same scale they weren't during the pandemic, prior to the gyms even having an option, or actual riders aren't going to want to get back on the roads at some point and feel that wind going through their hair. Well, then maybe you've made an error there, and the market is correcting that. It's a shame because Peloton is very inventory heavy, that there's a cash flow associated with that. It'd be much different if it's a pure play software, or it was just a marketing want to stick a write off. But in terms of, to answer your question more directly, what do I think of the company? I think it's fantastic. I think it got a lot of people in shape. I think it also did a lot for at-home fitness, and it created a lot of people trying to fight for that market share. It's going to be I think Peloton is more so like the Netscape, or maybe even the quote. I wouldn't say that. I don't associate them with someone like it's like the Netscape, like the first mover there, but it's going to set up the pace for a lot more long-term players, I think.
If they're the Netscape, then that's not very very positive.
Because it's not negative either. But the thing, they moved first, they dominated the market, and they essentially didn't necessarily do anything terribly wrong. They just essentially got displaced because of I think more so external circumstances than anything they did internally, and that's without me looking at their P&L or looking at their income statement or anything like that.
You gave me a great metric here. It's like either you're the Netscape of an industry, or if you're lucky, you're the Netflix of an industry. So, and it remains to be seen. Before I let you go, let me ask you about the emerging markets. So tell us again which markets you cover and which ones you're most excited about and why.
Well, it isn't. I cover Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia, Middle East and Northern Africa as well. With probably about 90% of my work in those emerging markets, with a big focus on Western Africa. Western Africa is comprised of, at least who we look at, is really three main countries. And that's Nigeria, Ghana, and Senegal. Really, I've had a big focus on Nigeria for quite some time, and I'm very excited about Nigeria. And there are actually hundreds of people much more qualified to speak about what's happening in Nigerian tech all across the world. There are there's a great podcast called the Afrobility Podcast. I definitely recommend anyone should check out. There's companies there that are changing the world, that we are not taking enough a deeper look at. A lot of times people are viewing Western Africa in particular, associating with philanthropy, where there's definitely philanthropic work that needs to be done in the country of Nigeria. But Google a picture right now of Lagos, book a flight to Lagos, go experience what this country, what it is. Go to Abuja, go to all these different metropolitan areas in the country. This is not what you think it is. And all that to say is this: the opportunity there is very interesting. Over 90% of this is the fastest growing middle class the country or the world has ever seen. It'll be the second biggest country in the world, behind India by 2100, and it might even get before that with the current growth rate. But over 90% of their transactions take place over cash. That's why there's a big fintech revolution trying to digitize cash for the past 5, 6, 7 years. People like Paga, people like even people like Flutterwave and the transaction processing, things like that, are trying to capture this market and trying to figure out a streamlined way for the Nigerian consumer, Western African consumer, to get their cash into a bank account. There's one or two reasons why. Is one, of course, it makes things much more easy to kind of create this interconnected web of fintech across the country once you digitize the cash. But also, if a country is going to become that big of a player on a global scale, you should probably understand the consumer itself. You have no idea what these voluntary surveys are doing. They're not doing any justice to represent the Nigerian population or the Western African population. I don't mean to loop those two in together, of course. Most of what I'm saying now pertains to Nigeria exclusively, but can also be replicated in other markets as well. But focusing just on Nigeria, if you don't have accurate data to understand the country that will be making that many global moves, then you're setting yourself up for failure. I think everyone is relying on. There's been too much of a focus on middle market exits within Nigeria, and entrepreneurs within the country will tell you the exact same thing. Is that people, the big giants over here in Silicon Valley, are just waiting to let everyone sort itself out in Nigeria, and they'll just acquire the players for their international expansion strategy. Jack Dorsey went over there, and Mark Zuckerberg's been over there, and saw that that is just that's not something that they can do. They can't afford to do it because their market caps just don't make sense. You're going to be spending, a third to a quarter percent of your market cap just acquiring one of these companies by the time they hit scale. These populations and the propensity to spend and the technology adaptation here in these countries are absolutely incredible. And the opportunity there is infinite. The biggest headwind is currency risk, and I think that's being largely mitigated, one, with the volatility of the USD, as well as international fiat currencies kind of fluctuating regardless. There's opportunities there in terms of decentralized finance, which is already being, and not to mention, look, no offense to American founders or anything, but a lot of what we're seeing in quote unquote the Western world is just revamped solutions of already streamlined processes. Last minute delivery services can get you pizza or toilet paper in 10 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes, right? But we saw this in Latin America, we saw this in Brazil with the kind of the neo banking revolution. Copy and paste that into what's happening in Nigeria. It's a true infrastructural development, but it's not happening at ground zero. It's taking the same processes that have worked and failed in the States, worked and failed in other markets across the world, and they're combining those solutions to create more bespoke type products for the African consumer. Not to mention when you implement those types of products and the tech savviness and the fully integrated tech stack they are producing with the already amazing and already fast growing consumer base, the opportunities are endless. Now, I don't know if the opportunities in terms of exits are as lucrative as institutional investors would like. As a family office, I just don't, a family office or a high net worth individual or even an entrepreneur looking to change the world, I would point you right towards that Western African region and say, look, this is not to mention, this is also not to mention the talent that exists there. The pure tech talent is second to none. It is absolutely second to none. You're seeing just truly amazing founders coming out of that region, and I've done almost all I can do to try and add exposure to them on a global scale, and to make it known to everyone that I am actively looking to, one, personally invest into the region. Two, I want to take startups that need the international money. I want to put them on a platform so they can reach the international scale, and so people stop viewing really Africa in general through these sunglasses, and they view it through what it really is, and it's a hotbed for talent, hotbed for change, and I'm just excited for hopefully the global narrative to shift in that favor.
Well, by all means, keep us informed and give us a heads up whenever you can, whenever you can. Don't have to keep something confidential. Well, I can hear your passion about it. Are you at all concerned about the political unrest in Africa? There have been 5 coups in the last 18 months. Now, not in these countries, but don't you, does that, I think I say that in the most macro, it's the most macro kind of fear because we know so little. It's just like, oh, do I need to, in Ukraine, we know there are troops on the border.
Yeah.
Troops on the border. They might come in. In Africa, it's just, so far away psychologically, mentally. Do you worry about that in Africa, in the countries you're following?
Yeah, well, not in the countries that I'm following. I think Nigeria is very well I guess positioned to avoid something like that. Ghana as well. Senegal is a very strong governmental system as well. I know there are definitely some critics out there that would argue otherwise, but in terms of the pure I guess the volatility that's associated with more dictatorships, we run into those issues. But what you're asking is, there's been a huge influx in capital headed towards places like Hong Kong and Singapore in general, but you didn't see that. You didn't see valuations affected when there was a coup in Myanmar. You also didn't see Stripe's valuation be impacted at all on January 6th of 2021. Also, not to mention, there's $4 billion neobanks based out of Brazil, and there's a pure dictator that's in office right now in Brazil. And Bolsonaro, regardless of your political opinion, he's a dictator. And so I think that we're also, it's easy to say that from the outside looking in. The bigger risk is associated with an action like that disrupting supply chain, which would then affect the currency, which brings back to my original point is there's huge currency risk. Another thing that's really interesting to point out is it's not a very interconnected market. So you say, there could be a coup in, for instance, Rwanda or the Congo or one of the countries that have experienced, similar kind of unrest in the past 2 decades. It wouldn't necessarily affect supply chains and wouldn't have a direct hit on someone like the Naira or someone like that there in Nigeria. It's very decentralized economies. And one of the reasons also, I think, if we're tailoring it back, I think there's a huge opportunity there. And honestly, there's a huge movement to. I can't pretend to be the genesis of the idea of towards like a unionization of some of these African countries, like the African Union modeled after the EU here on the European bloc.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that happening within the next 5 to 10 years because, again, mentioning more so about political unrest, there's a lot of issues need to be solved there. But no, to answer your question, I'm not necessarily concerned about that as it pertains to places like Nigeria. I'm more concerned with external factors and the lack of IP protection that Nigerian domiciled companies have. It's very hard to protect your IP, and if there's a solution, that's essentially there's a moat around it in Nigeria with minimal funding, then someone can copy that, domicile it there in the UK, here in the UK, and then just have a satellite office there operating in Nigeria. They'll probably have a higher valuation, and for very, very unfortunate circumstances, have what's considered a more credible team. And as long as that is consistent and that persists in our markets, it's going to be a very big issue. So I always encourage people to look directly on the continent for its solutions. If there's a company that's operating in Africa, it needs to have a boots on the ground office in Africa, or at least ties there, and to prevent kind of the situations you explained from happening.
Travis, you give us a lot of bang for the buck. Appreciate it. Travis Bruffy is a venture analyst at Ligo Partners. They're a collection of family offices that has an even bigger, I think I would describe it as a consortium of family offices. They do an amazing job, and I'm saying this firsthand. I saw your pitches recently, and I think it was 82 culled down to 8 pitches, curated down to 8 pitches. And every one of them seemed like a real winner. I was really impressed. I was like, okay, until I see something better, this is kind of the gold standard of pitches. Very high level, incredible teams, looking for the money. Investors already in the deal in all cases. So it was really impressive, and I commend you for that. Most of all, I commend you for finding life after sports, life after football. You're physically 100 pounds lighter, but I think intellectually maybe you're gaining some weight. So
I don't know if I'd say that. I don't know. I think we all should be gaining weight up there, or else we're just dying slowly.
Yeah, upstairs. But listen, thanks so much for being with the Accelerator, and we hope to have you back again and to stay in touch with you, particularly about the Nigerian, sub-Saharan African markets and your specialties of sports gaming and and especially cannabis. Let's not forget cannabis. But great to see you, and thanks to everybody for listening to the Accelerator with Michael Conniff. That's me, and we'll be back before you know it. Thanks again.